My name is Sylvie Ackroyd. I'm in the windy corridor between my apartment and our neighbors. It may not be my most special place in Bellingham, but I do enjoy watching the light and wind on these vine maples out my window. My family's moved around a lot, trampling all over the lands of many indigenous peoples in Canada and America. My maternal grandmother's parents came from the US from Germany. They lived in Pennsylvania, Vermont, Massachusetts, and later Southern California, where my grandmother was born. My maternal grandfather's family also came to the US from Germany and were loggers and maybe farmers in Idaho, Montana, and Washington. My great-grandfather was an engineer who worked on dams in Montana and California, and my grandfather grew up moving several times a year. Both the logging and dam building disrupted the land and how indigenous peoples maintained and lived off of it. My mother was born in Bishop, California, on the traditional lands of the Northern Paiute, Eastern Mono, and Western Shoshone peoples. She lived 7 miles from the Bishop Paiute Reservation, one of the places Native peoples of the Owens Valley were pushed into in 1963 when the city of LA wanted to divert water from ancient irrigation systems into an aqueduct to supply the city. My maternal grandfather's family came from England, and my grandfather was born in Albany, New York, and grew up in Providence, Rhode Island. My paternal grandmother's family came from Ireland and Scotland, and came to the US via Ellis Island in Canada, eventually settling in Detroit, on the lands of Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi tribes. Growing up, my father lived in Massachusetts and Florida and spent summers in Woods Hole on the bottom of Cape Cod, on the lands of the Wampanoag tribe. Settlers have been living on Wampanoag land since the 1620s, but the Wampanoag tribe were only recognized federally in 2007. I was born in Massachusetts, but have now spent the majority of my life on the lands of the Nisqually Cowlitz, Squaxin, and Coast Salish peoples in Olympia, and the lands of the Nooksack and Coast Salish peoples in Bellingham. I don't know if my unsettled settler family can claim any place as ours, but these places we certainly can't.
My great-grandmother, Frances Louise Bell, was born in 1913 in Denver, Colorado, lands of the Arapaho and Cheyenne tribal nation. According to the tribe's website, the Arapaho and Cheyenne people were originally from the Great Lakes region and didn't come to the Great Plains until they were displaced by settlers. I don't know who lived on the lands before them. Frances was the daughter of Czechoslovakian immigrants. She was a department store clerk, sister, housewife, mother, and eventually grandmother and great-grandmother. She lived a simple life of a cobbler's daughter until marrying my great-grandfather Jack. I doubt Frances and Jack ever thought about the Arapaho and Cheyenne people, or if they did, it wasn't recorded, much like a majority of their lives. For the most part, they were busy making ends meet. My grandfather remembers pleasing his mother by buying dented cans for half price and trading in the coupons from her Rolay cigarette packets. 3 generations later, I was born 9 miles from where my great-grandmother was born, and her name, Frances, was my first gift. I also grew up on Arapaho and Cheyenne tribal lands. My lifestyle was considerably more luxurious than my great-grandmother's, but equally ignorant, that the land we were both raised on was stolen. To me, Arapaho was the neighboring county, where we visited my grandparents in the Cherry Creek neighborhood. I never knew growing up about the invitation from Chief Little Raven to the first white settlers to camp on Cherry Creek, or that 6 years later, 150 of the tribe's people were murdered by the settlers in what is now known as the Sand Creek Massacre. I've never considered my heritage much past the fact that I'm an American mutt with nameless ancestors from everywhere and nowhere. The future-focused values of our culture and my generation excused me from stopping to think about my ancestors and the ancestors of the land. It turns out very few of the people in the past 3 generations of my family have stopped and asked these questions, and so much of our history is lost without a storyteller to keep it alive. They've passed down to me privileged genetic traits, but their thoughts and feelings are as mysterious to me as those of the men, women, and children lost at the Cherry Creek Massacre, and the people before them who I do not know the names of.
Well, I didn't know much about my cultural heritage at all going into this, and my dad didn't really either, and both of my grandparents have passed, but they never really talked about it besides of like snippets of information. And so when my asked my dad about this project, he started translating the records that my grandpa had, but they were in Swedish. And so what he learned shocked me and my dad both. Records that my grandpa had, but they were in Swedish. And it's kind of ironic because Lindstrom means meadowbrook in Swedish, which is the land that he was taken off of as a child. He's a part of the Sami tribe that is located in northern Sweden and Russia, Norway, and Finland. The Sami people are nomadic herders and gatherers. They herd reindeer, and they were forced off their lands from the 1650s to the 1930s, and a lot of the young children were forced into province-led boarding schools, which my great-grandfather attended in Luleå, Sweden, where he proceeded to grow up and live most of his life after that, where he had my grandfather. And from there, he moved his family to Issaquah, Washington, taking the Trans-Canadian Railroad across many indigenous lands of Canada. I never realized that my heritage had some similar backgrounds to the people of this land that I live on currently. I am grateful that I'm weaved into the story of the land which I live on, and I have to thank all of the tribes that I've lived on their land and the many lands that my family have crossed to get to this point. Thank you very much.
My name is Gabriela Maria Gonzalez Yoxtheimer. The length of my name has always been a difficult part of my identity. However, as I've grown, it has become a connection with my ancestors that I've always craved. Maria is my abuelita's name. She's from Guadalajara, Mexico, the capital of Jalisco, which is known for its origin of tequila and mariachi music. This region is considered the magic circle of Mexico because it's where grassland, arid shrub, temperate forest, tropical evergreen, and tropical deciduous ecosystems meet. Her family has a ranch in the grasslands where they raised cattle and traveled them over the hills to drink at the Grande de Santiago River. They grew fruit and vegetables, specifically what my abuela remembers are the sweet zucchini flowers. They've had that property for as long as she remembers. Her some other grandfather owned the land. My abuela is on the wider side, to the most part. However, her culture and community is of the Coca people. They traveled all throughout the magic circle and created a complex economy. Coca means servants in their native tongue. They have always been considered that by neighboring groups and by the Spanish who used them to build their chapels as they moved west. Colonized histories leave many holes and trauma in the people's past where your ancestry stops to continue a different path. My abuelita has always had a relationship with agriculture and land. It has been passed down knowledge of when to seed and harvest. When she and my abuelito moved to Washington, they brought their knowledge to serve their new community as they once had. Though we cannot pass our physical history of people, the wisdom and heart it took to change your path can.